music world is reeling after a shocking revelation about what really happened to André Rieu at 75, famous for his spectacular performances and timeless compositions. No one could have anticipated the emotional shock that followed his latest announcement. At 75, André Rieu, the beloved king of the waltz, is facing the greatest challenge of his life. A sudden health panic during a performance has left fans across the world stunned, raising serious concerns about his future. What happened to André Rieu will break your heart more than you can imagine. The music world is still reeling from the shock, but perhaps the real heartbreak didn't begin on stage in Mexico City. It began long before the lights, long before the applause. It began in a cold, silent house in post-war Maastricht, Netherlands, where music was everything and love was nowhere to be found. André Rieu was born on October 1949, the third of 6 children in a devout Roman Catholic family. His father, also named André Rieu, was a stern and accomplished conductor of the Maastricht Symphony Orchestra. In public, he was revered. At home, he was feared. Their house, young André would later recall, felt more like a military barracks than a place for children. Affection was replaced by discipline. Praise was replaced by pressure. "My parents didn't love me very much," André once said. "That's not a feeling. That's just the truth." There were no hugs, no laughter, no freedom. Friends weren't allowed over. The house was quiet, not with peace, but with suppression. His mother obsessed over school grades and violin practice. When teachers once called André an artist, she took offense, as if it were an insult. In that house, perfection was the only currency of worth. And even that, it seemed, was never enough. But something miraculous happened in 1954. When André was 5, he fell in love. Not with the violin, but with the person who held it. She was 18, blonde, beautiful. His first violin teacher. He was too young to understand romance, but old enough to feel awe. He barely understood the notes, but he was hypnotized by her hands, the way she moved the bow, the way the instrument responded to her touch. Within weeks, while other children were still struggling to hold the bow correctly, André had discovered vibrato, the emotional wobble that brings a note to life. He didn't care about playing perfectly. He wanted to feel something. And music finally let him, yet even this joy came with a shadow. As André entered his teenage years in the early 1960s, the tension between him and his father became unbearable, and his passion for waltzes and light-hearted classical music clashed with his father's rigid vision of high art. When André finally confessed he wanted to play waltzes, his father snapped, "I didn't educate you to play waltzes." It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. His love for joy in music was seen as betrayal. The defining rupture came in the late 1960s, around 1968, when André brought home the woman he loved, Marjorie, his future wife. Instead of welcoming her, his mother told her to leave. "Go back to your clean room," she told her son, as if he was still a child, as if love had no place in their world. That night, André made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He walked out, and he never looked back. His parents never attended a single concert, not even when he sold out arenas, not even when he became one of the most successful classical performers in history. "I spent years in therapy trying to understand why my childhood felt so empty," he once confessed. The success, the castles, the thousands of fans chanting his name, none of it could fully heal the silence that once filled his home. But perhaps it helped him rewrite it. Music became more than art. It became survival. It became the only place where emotion wasn't punished, but celebrated. The violin wasn't just an instrument. It was his voice, his armor, and his salvation. "Only when I played did I feel seen," he once said. In the darkness of a loveless childhood, he found light in melody, and from those early wounds, he carved out a mission to make music that made people feel alive, to bring joy where once there was silence. Because in the end, his greatest performance wasn't on stage. It was surviving the symphony of rejection and turning it into something beautiful. By the late 1970s, André Rieu had reached a quiet but painful crossroads. Still haunted by a childhood devoid of warmth, he had tried for years to fit inside the traditional mold of classical music, playing dutifully in his father's orchestra. But the coldness he had known at home had followed him into the concert halls. Formal, rigid, soulless. The musicians talked about the weather, about their pay. He recalled, "No one talked about the music. This was not the future he wanted. In 1978, at age 29, he formed a small ensemble, the Maastricht Salon Orchestra, barely more than a group of hopefuls with a few instruments and a shared dream. They played in border towns, in wedding halls, wherever anyone would listen. There was no glamour and barely any money, but André was finally free. Behind the scenes, something else was quietly transforming his life. Marjorie, not just his wife, but the anchor of his being. A teacher, a writer, a composer in secret. Marjorie believed in him when no one else did. While his parents had rejected his dreams, Marjorie nurtured them. She managed the business, handled the bookings, and even wrote arrangements under anonymity. Sell more records, she once told him bluntly when he hesitated about buying a 15th century castle. She wasn't being frivolous. She was building the foundation of an empire. But this empire was born out of therapy, not triumph. For years, André had sought professional help to work through the wounds of a loveless upbringing. "My parents didn't love me. That's not a feeling, that's a fact," he would later say. Therapy helped him understand the silence, the coldness, the void that had shaped him. But healing wasn't passive. He needed to create a world that looked nothing like the one he had come from. By 1987, that need turned into action. At nearly 40 years old, André decided the Maastricht Salon Orchestra had run its course. It was time to dream bigger, to build something that could bring joy, not just notes on a page. That year, he founded the Johann Strauss Orchestra with just 12 musicians. It was a bold, almost laughable idea. No one thought a waltz orchestra could survive the era of rock stars and pop idols. But André wasn't trying to fit in. He was trying to rewrite the rules. On January 1988, they performed their first concert. No one wore stiff black suits. The lighting was theatrical. The music was alive. People clapped, laughed, even sang along. Critics scoffed, but André saw something else. Tears, smiles, transformation. "I don't want to impress experts," he once said. "I want to move people." In that first year, they played modest halls and old folk tunes. But the idea, music as celebration, not ceremony, was catching fire. Marjorie continued to orchestrate from the shadows, shaping the sound and managing the finances. Therapy, music, love, rebellion, they had all come together in this strange, beautiful experiment. André had no idea that just 7 years later, in 1995, a single waltz at a football stadium would turn him into an international phenomenon. But even in those early days, the mission was clear. Joy was the point. The orchestra wasn't just entertainment. It was healing for him and the millions who would soon come to listen. Before the world saw André Rieu transform a football stadium into a waltzing ballroom, few could have imagined the quiet war he had already fought just to get there. For decades, he had struggled, not only to heal from a loveless childhood, but to prove that emotion had a place in classical music. His journey wasn't driven by ego, but by a need to bring joy where there had once been silence. That need would explode into history in 1995, when a single, halftime performance rewrote the rules and changed everything. They called him a clown, a fraud, a sellout. But in May 1995, André Rieu stepped into the center of a football pitch and changed the fate of classical music forever. It was the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna, Ajax versus Bayern Munich, an event watched by over 300 million viewers across Europe. The energy was electric. But during halftime, something no one expected happened. Rieu and his Johann Strauss Orchestra took to the field and played Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2. Within seconds, the entire stadium, over 50,000 football fans, began to sway, hum, and clap along. The atmosphere transformed from a tense match into a grand ballroom. People who had never cared about classical music were suddenly moved. It wasn't just a performance, it was a cultural detonation. André later recalled with a smile, "Ajax did me a huge favor by scoring just before halftime. The timing was perfect. What followed was a phenomenon no one could have predicted." In the days after that performance, Rieu sold over 200,000 CDs in a week. The album, Strauss & Company, which had been modestly released the year before, rocketed to the top of the Dutch charts, staying there for an unprecedented 19 weeks. In total, the album would go on to sell over 3 million copies worldwide. Germany embraced him next. The album broke into the top 5 on the German pop charts, a feat previously unimaginable for a classical recording. And Australia? In Melbourne alone, 38,605 people filled the Telstra Dome to see him live, breaking the record for the largest classical concert ever held in the country. Over 3 shows, nearly 90,000 people attended. At one point, Rieu's DVDs held 8 of the top 10 spots on Australia's music DVD chart. Only Pink and AC/DC managed to interrupt his dominance. But success didn't shield him from the venom of traditionalists. Critics and classical purists erupted. One conductor sneered that Rieu's performances were musical pornography. Others accused him of reducing a centuries-old art form to circus spectacle. The glittering gowns, the emotional outbursts, the jokes, the choreographed lighting. None of it belonged in a serious concert hall, and yet millions of fans disagreed. They weren't just buying tickets. They were bringing their families, dressing up, dancing in the aisles, and crying in their seats. They didn't see a fraud. They saw freedom. Rieu had tapped into something that elite circles had long ignored: the hunger for emotion, for joy, for beauty that wasn't locked behind velvet ropes and stiff traditions. He once said, "You know that solemn atmosphere you find in classical concerts? That's exactly what keeps people away. With us, it simply isn't there." In 2008, he doubled down on his vision. He built a full-scale replica of Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace, complete with fountains, chandeliers, even horse-drawn carriages, and took it on tour. It cost over 30 million euros and horrified the classical world. But for audiences, it was magic. By 2010, thanks to that unforgettable 1995 moment and everything that followed, André Rieu wasn't just a musician. He was a movement, a revolution in a tailcoat, waltzing straight into the hearts of millions. And no matter what the critics said, he had already won. By 2010, André Rieu had reached the global recognition. But behind the glittering waltzes and packed arenas, his body and soul were quietly screaming for rest. That year, tragedy struck in the form of a viral infection that damaged his inner ear. It may sound minor, but for a violinist, balance and orientation are everything. Suddenly, André could not walk straight, let alone perform. He was forced to cancel a long-awaited tour, a decision that shattered him emotionally. For a man who had prided himself on never letting down his audience, it felt like betrayal. It wasn't just about missing performances. It was the terrifying realization that his body, once his ally, might now become his cage. In interviews, he would later admit, "It was the first time I truly feared that this could all end." But worse was still to come. In December 2016, during what was supposed to be a joyful Christmas tour in the UK, another blow came. This time not to his body, but to his heart. Ruud Merckx, his longtime trombonist and one of his closest friends, died unexpectedly in his sleep while on tour in Leeds. Merckx had been part of the orchestra for over 2 decades. His wife, also a violinist in the group, was by his side when he passed. André was devastated. He cancelled the Nottingham concert immediately and soon after the entire tour. London, Birmingham, Glasgow, all gone from the schedule. It was the first time André Rieu bowed not to illness but to grief. He was family, André later said, when he died. It felt like losing a brother. The loss echoed through the orchestra. Many of had been with him for 25 years or more. That Christmas was silent, filled not with music, but mourning. Despite these devastations, André kept going. He performed through fevers, exhaustion, loneliness. Even in 2019, during a brutal flu, he went on stage, smiling for the crowd, hiding the pain. For him, music was a duty, not just to his fans, but to the people who shared the stage with him. He knew that every cancelled concert meant lost income, disappointed fans, and broken momentum. So he endured, but no amount of endurance could protect him from what in March 2024. At 74 years old, during a tour in Mexico City, a city known for its high altitude and dry air, André collapsed backstage after just his second performance. The mix of jet lag, altitude sickness, and a vicious flu had finally broken him. He was dizzy, feverish, and in his own words, felt 100 years old. He called his wife from backstage, barely holding back tears, and confessed something he had never said before. "I don't want a first concert day like this ever again." It was a line in the sand. For the first time in his life, André cancelled an entire tour. Over 40,000 fans missed their chance to see him live. For a man who built his empire on never giving up, this collapse wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It was the moment the invincible king of the waltz finally showed he was human. And yet, even in this moment of raw vulnerability, André's spirit didn't crumble. He didn't hide. Instead, he made a promise. He would never torture himself like that again. His son Pierre, who had quietly taken on more and more leadership behind the scenes, stepped in more assertively. Tour schedules were redesigned. No more back-to-back flights across continents. No more pushing through illness. Europe only. Closer to home. Safer. Pierre had not only become the keeper of the business, but the guardian of his father's health. It was a turning point, not just for André's career, but for the way his legacy would continue. In losing strength, he found protection. In falling, he found the arms of those who truly loved him. And in the silence that followed the cancelled concerts, André heard something powerful, the music of life, asking him to stay just a little longer, but only on his own terms. But the greatest test of André's resilience came not on stage, but during the global silence of the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020 and 2021, every concert was cancelled, every tour postponed, and his global empire came to a standstill. For an artist who thrived on live connection, the silence was deafening. Financially, the impact was catastrophic. Tens of millions of euros lost. But even worse was the human cost. Hundreds of orchestra members, technicians, designers, drivers, and staff faced uncertainty. And yet, André did the unthinkable. He refused to lay off a single person. Out of his own pocket, he continued to pay their salaries, month after month, quietly shouldering the burden. At one point, he even listed his beloved Stradivarius violin for sale, not to part with it, but to protect it from being seized if bankruptcy came. "I couldn't bear the thought of losing it," he would later say. "But I couldn't bear the thought of letting my people go even more." During lockdown, he retreated into the quiet halls of his castle, where he wrote music in solitude, pouring his fears, his hopes, and his grief into new compositions. It was a dark time, but also a transformative one. For the first time in decades, he slowed down. He reflected. He prepared, not just to return, but to return wiser, more intentional, more human. When the world reopened, it wasn't just a comeback, it was a resurrection. That resurrection came with a new chapter, healing and recalibration. In 2022 and 2023, his concerts took on a quieter, more emotional tone. Where once there were dazzling light shows and opulent sets, now there was intimacy, stories, memories, gratitude. During one performance in Vienna, he paused mid-show and simply said, "Every note we play tonight is a thank you for still being here." Audiences didn't just applaud, they cried. The music had always been a celebration. Now it was also a prayer, more than ever. André seemed to channel not just melodies, but emotion, a lifetime of pain, resilience, and grace pouring through his violin. And standing behind him always was Pierre, managing the chaos, shielding his father from the grind, ensuring that every note could be played in peace. That same year, André quietly repurchased the Stradivarius he had nearly sold. It was not just an instrument, it was a symbol of survival. The castle that had once felt like a fortress of dreams now became a sanctuary. There, he resumed composing, not to impress, but to express. A new suite born from those silent pandemic nights was premiered to a tearful crowd in Maastricht. And though he joked about playing until 1.4, even his smile now carried the wisdom of a man who knows that every encore might be the last. Still, he stood. Still, he played. Because for André Rieu, music is not performance. It is life itself. In the serene town of Maastricht, where André Rieu's story first began, the legendary violinist now spends most of his days within the ivy-covered walls of a 15th century castle that he and his wife Marjorie purchased on a whim while on vacation. It's not just a residence. It's the heart of an empire, designed by Rieu himself. The castle is a reflection of his soul, Austrian elegance, Bavarian charm, and Venetian romance all rolled into one fantastical space that houses not just their lives, but also the operations of his musical kingdom. Here, amid grand chandeliers and echoing halls, the music never truly stops, but André has changed. Now, at 75, he has reached a place of reflection, of reverence, and perhaps of farewell. Since collapsing backstage in Mexico City in March 2024, an event that shook fans and rattled the man himself. He's made sweeping changes. His days of globe-trotting performances are behind him. No more jet lag-inducing tours across continents. His concerts now take place only in Europe, mostly near his home. "I have nothing left to prove." He once confided to a close friend, "What matters now is that I play from the heart and stay alive to feel it." The man once driven by perfection is now governed by preservation. His daily routine is centered around health, early nights, balanced meals, gentle exercise, and a personal trainer who travels with him when he does perform. His medical team monitors him closely. After all, the emotional and physical toll of years on the road has left its scars. Yet in his eyes, there is no bitterness, just peace. Marjorie, his lifelong partner and quiet co-creator, remains the unseen engine behind it all. Though she has written numerous compositions for the orchestra, she's never sought credit. Her soul lives in the music. André once said, "Their bond is evident not only in the music, but in every decision made." It was Marjorie who told him, when their accountant called about the old Maastricht castle, "Just sell more records." And he did. His son Pierre has stepped up not merely as a manager, but as a guardian. For years, he quietly assumed more responsibility, managing logistics and shielding his father from unnecessary stress. But now, he is the captain steering the ship. Every venue booked, every tour, date considered. It all filters through Pierre's careful hands. He is the reason André can still walk on stage, violin in hand, with the confidence that everything behind the scenes is under control. And then there's Daisy. At just 9 years old, André's granddaughter is already sitting at the piano during rehearsals with the orchestra. It's not a publicity stunt, it's legacy in motion. André and Marjorie have never forced the next generation into the spotlight. "We open the door," Marjorie once said, "and wait to see if the music calls to them." For Daisy, it has. Despite his age, André Rieu remains astonishingly productive. His schedule has been reduced, but his passion has not. He still releases albums, oversees musical arrangements, and surprises his team with spontaneous rehearsal sessions in the castle. But now, he plays not for critics or records, but for joy, for healing, for family, for the memory of those he's lost, and the music that kept him standing. His wealth, once nearly lost during the pandemic, is now carefully managed. He owns over 80 properties across the Netherlands, a testament not to extravagance, but to survival. "Bricks don't vanish in a storm," he said once, recalling how close he came to losing everything in 2020. When the world shut down, André kept paying his hundreds of staff members out of his own pocket. No one was laid off. He even listed his beloved Stradivarius violin for sale, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Eventually, he took it off the market. "It's a part of me," he admitted quietly. Outside the limelight, André continues to make silent gestures that resonate deeply. When a group of mentally disabled musicians had their instruments stolen in 2019, he replaced every single piece, nearly 20,000, without fanfare. When the Notre Dame Cathedral burned, he offered 700 tons of steel to aid in the restoration. These acts were never announced by press releases or Instagram posts. They were simply done. André Rieu today is not the same man who once battled to prove that waltzes were worth the world's attention. He no longer needs to convince anyone. He's done that, and more. Now, every concert is a tribute to love, to pain, to music, to life. The 2025 Maastricht concert series may well be his final bow on the world stage. If so, it will be the place he both began and completed his circle. He still jokes, "I'll play until I'm 140. But the twinkle in his eye reveals more humility than hubris. He knows his time is precious. Every note he plays is one more thank you to the life he built, the family that stood beside him, and the audience that never stopped listening. And perhaps, in those final lingering vibrations of a waltz, the world will hear not just the sound of music, but the heartbeat of a man who gave it all away, only to find it return to him tenfold. As the summer of 2025 approaches, Maastricht prepares to welcome the stage is set not just for another concert, but perhaps for a quiet goodbye cloaked in music and memory. Fans from across the globe are booking their journeys, eager to witness what may be André Rieu's final grand performance. There will be no tearful declarations or dramatic announcements. If this is the end, it will be as he has always preferred, through melody, not words. André's story has never been about applause. It's been about connection. If his violin falls silent after this, it won't be from defeat, but from fulfillment. A life lived in crescendo, a heart that found harmony. If his music ever moved you, made you smile, made you cry, reminded you of love or loss, then perhaps now is the time to say thank you. Share this story. Leave a comment. Send him your love. Because in every lingering note, André Rieu is still listening.